Yeah, like Maggie, I've veered away from the title given in the program. Certainly in terms of the words I've used here, although I think that the theme is the same. When I was putting this together, I realised that a lot of what I wanted to say on this topic of communicating sort of technical knowledge about flood risk, and particularly within professional communities, but also broader than that. I realised a lot of what I wanted to say fell under the same title for me as a talk I gave last year as a flooding conference, which was called Future Skills Means More Than Training. So if we could move on, please. So just to give a little bit more perspective on where I'm coming from with this. So essentially, I'm speaking from an industry perspective here, if you like, an industry insider within flood and coastal erosion risk management. But it's a slightly unusual industry perspective, because although I'm a consultant as part of my day job, and have been for 15 years or so, most of my time now is spent as director of a charity funded by JBA, my employer, and I guess our overall aim, really, our ambition, is to help people make good decisions about managing risk, and specifically flood risk, but also sort of other related risks that concern the water environment. And the way that we do this is by supporting research through knowledge sharing, through education and training, and I think all of those things really can be described as some form of knowledge sharing. Next, please. So let me just reflect for a moment on the nature of the challenge here. The slide says future challenges, but actually, these challenges, as I tried to describe yesterday, are with us now. Could you go back, please, Ted? One slide seems to be skipping forwards. Thank you. So actually, the Environment Agency, which is the flood risk management authority in England, currently have a program of work to revise their flooding and coastal risk management strategy. So they published a draft strategy last year, and really that sums it up in this ambition, which is to create a nation resilient to flooding and coastal change to the year 2100. And what the Environment Agency's draft strategy actually says is a nation resilient to flooding and coastal change now and for the future. So this is a short-term and a long-term thing, and that I think is really a useful starting point for all of us working within the flood and coastal sector. And I talked yesterday about risks, and tried to put some numbers and some sort of technical foundations on our understanding of flood risk in the UK. Pictures also convey this very clearly, and these are images from recent events. The damage to infrastructure at Dawlish on the coast, and a rescue operation from flooding. I think this was after Storm Desmond. Next slide, please. So perhaps I could just comment a little bit on what I've called the flood and coastal sector. So really, I'm thinking here about people who work on flood and coastal risk management. That may be their full-time job. They may be, sort of fully within the FCRM industry, or it may be that this is part of their job because they're involved in drainage engineering or highways. Could you go back, please, Ted? Thanks. Or some other related activity. Clearly, when we were planning this workshop, it was going to be physically located in Lancaster. So my idea here was to use Lancaster as a kind of comparator. But there was a depth for skills survey that a few years ago that suggested there were around about 117,000 people who were involved within the flood and coastal risk management sector in one form or another. The picture that you can see there is the skyline of Lancaster City. So by way of comparison, that 170,000 people, while the working age population of Lancaster District, which is the red blob on the map, is about 96,000 people, and the total population, I think, is about 145,000. So the number of people involved in flood and coastal management is quite substantial in the UK. And I guess the point I really want to make about this is that there is a very wide range of skill sets involved here. There are some very obvious things like civil engineering, structural engineering, but also environmental science, hydrologists, ecologists, economists, project managers, quantity surveyors, and the list goes on. And increasingly, I think we already have an important role for software and for data analysis, and increasingly, software and data science skills are going to be prominent. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, turning to that, in terms of future challenges, clearly one of the important developments that we're currently going through, and so I guess that's part of the reason why we've come together for this workshop is the rise of data. Datafication, I think David called it yesterday, or datism. So we skip back, please, thanks. So we have this concept of big data, growing volume and velocity of data, and within flood and coastal risk management, it's no different. We're already seeing significant advances in our approaches to data, and almost every week I see some discussion or proposal or conversation about the use of sensor technology, or Earth observation, or other forms of data inputs. And of course, models are becoming increasingly sophisticated, delivering increasing volumes and complexity of data, and we're faced with the challenge of then making sense of that, of all of that data, and communicating it. And if you could advance the slide, please, Ted. And I realise that there's some kind of auto advance going on here. And just on that point about making sense of data, I think this is a really crucial question. Sense making or reasoning and obtaining understanding over complex data sets is really important. We've been doing some work on this over the last few years with a team called Ensemble, which is based at Lancaster University, led by Gordon Blair in the School of Computing and Communications, and we've spent a couple of years exploring what a contemporary sort of data science and computer science view perspective would bring to the flood and coastal risk management sector. So I think at the moment, or certainly up until the recent past, within the flood management industry, there's been a tendency for a very structured approach to data. So we're all quite familiar working with large structured relational databases. Flood risk is often, treated as something that's quantified in terms of hard numbers. I showed some of those yesterday. Maggie also showed some this morning. And one of the questions we asked ourselves in the work with the ensemble team was, how should we really envisage or describe a flood event as a kind of data object? What should that really look like? And it's pretty clear to me, and the way we went with this is that we shouldn't think of a flood event or flood risk in general as a sort of a flat table of numbers. So we've been exploring ideas about alternative representations. There's a paper which is currently under review in the Journal of Flood Risk Management. This diagram is taken from it. This is a highly simplified version of what we labeled a data hypercube. Really, I think it's some form of knowledge graph that describes a flood event. And there's a further example in the paper, which I hope we'll be able to show it even when it passes peer review, that fleshes this out for a specific flood event, which was the floods of winter 2000s. Straight away, we've got in here sort of things like physical states of nature, which would include observations of river levels or weather, and also physical states of engineered asset systems like flood defences. There's a kind of risk analyst's view of the events under this category of components, where we break things down into hazards and vulnerabilities and impacts. There's information about causality, the duration of the event, the provenance of the information, and I think this type of data concept really should also extend to include narratives, stories, and the kind of things that Maggie was talking about just before me. And I guess our thesis with this is that really we need to be moving towards a semantically enriched approach to data within flood risk management, so that we can take a much richer view of data that is both highly structured in terms of conventional observations, but also accommodates a very wide range of unstructured forms of data, including stories and narratives. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Moving back to the challenges we face as an industry, I think there are another set of challenges around diversity, and setting that diversity against the global context of global warming, climate change, and also social and economic and policy consequences of that global picture, which are all things that will and already are impacting on the way in which we understand flooding and coastal risk, and the way in which we would manage it in the UK and internationally. And the need for diversity here, in a sort of a narrow industry sense, and I'm not really talking here about the broader societal agenda, but specifically in terms of our skill sets, it relates to that very broad range of skills that I described earlier, and the growing importance that there will be in terms of data analysis skills, data communication skills, and that it seems very likely that diversity of skill sets should also and that we would benefit from it being accompanied by greater diversity in other dimensions of diversity, including ethnicity, age, gender, value sets, and all these other things. If we could move to the next slide, please. Finally, in terms of the challenges we faced, I guess all of this is set against the concept that we don't have a crystal ball, and we, in thinking about flood risk management, we're often focusing on incident response and on very short-term acute crises, but a lot of what we're doing is also looking ahead a long way into the future in terms of policies and investments in infrastructure, and in the way that we go about planning land use and infrastructure. So the future is uncertain. We know that global warming is with us and will continue for some time, but quite how that unfolds is still uncertain. There are scientific and technical uncertainties all over flood management. A lot of the science is subject to uncertainty, as are our data and our models. So we've got very complex and often sort of very large decisions to be made under the backdrop of deep uncertainty. And so one of the consequences of that, I think, is that within the industry, we need a skills base that's highly adaptable and flexible, and that will be able to respond to and anticipate change, and that that means strong soft skills as well as the kind of more traditional technical training, and particularly, I guess, skills around communication and collaboration. So we could move forward, please. So, just to bring us back to the work we're doing with the JBA Trust, I mentioned an example a minute ago about our work on data science, but from a higher level perspective, I suppose our strategy here is that is to look at knowledge sharing at all stages and levels of education and skills acquisition, and to try to do this across multiple sectors and disciplines. Now, by way of calibration, we're not a large organisation. Our annual resource is around about £150,000, which is the donation we receive from the JBA group of companies. So that's a good resource to work with, but we're not a very large scale charity either. So so we're chipping away at these things, but our strategy involves engagement with communities, with schools from primary age through to secondary and college education, with universities, both in terms of training and research, and also in terms of professional developments. And I guess the position we've evolved is that we feel we need to engage at all these levels, and engage in knowledge sharing at all these levels in order to try to build the kind of skills capability and ultimately to develop the lines of communication that we need for environmental risk management and flooding as we move forward. So if I could just move on, please, Ted. So, just to summarise some of the things we've been doing. Last year we ran 59 community events. Very often those revolve around the use of a suite of physical and augmented reality models. So we have dry models and wet models, and there's a description of those on our webpage and various YouTube videos and things that accompany them. The great thing about these kind of models is that they seem to break down barriers. They seem to provide a conversation starter and a talking point, and it's incredible to see, when you gather a group of people around something like this augmented reality sandbox that enables them to experiment with flood hydrology in real time. Straight away, people start talking about risk analysis and risk management, and start to intuitively explore what can often be really quite complex technical questions in a very natural kind of way. One observation I've had about this, when we first developed this kind of kit, we envisaged using it primarily with schools, and we often do that, and hopefully we'll go back to doing that once we're in a safer world from as regards public health. But also actually the observation about these things being conversation starters, I found holds just as well in the professional community. And when we take this kind of kit to professional conferences, you see senior senior representatives of businesses and NGOs and government agencies getting stuck in and talking to each other over the model in a way that I hadn't necessarily expected at the outset. Could move to the next slide, please. So our schools work also involves, as I said, we have the wet models. So there's a hydraulic flume here being demonstrated by one of our colleagues, and we've been developing educational resources to sit alongside the models over time, and have been recently we packaged some of those together, particularly with a view to the current need for home learning. And if we can move on, please, Ted. In terms of higher education, we part of our work involves offering grants. So we jointly with the British Hydrological Society and in the last few years with the Environment Agency, we've offered 65 student bursaries for MSc level, master's level education since 2011, and those would be master's topics broadly related to the water environment, and including flooding and coastal risk. I was about to move on. Thank you. We've also been involved in developing a PG Cert and MSc program on flood and coastal risk management, which has been running jointly with Lancaster University since 2012, I think it started, and we've offered some bursaries to that program over that time. There are a number of other programs that relate to flooding or flood engineering at postgraduate level that have emerged around the country. Hull, I think Chris might have just tweeted or linked something about that. There's a scheme I know developing at Hull. There's one at Chester, Brunel, UWE. So the capability I think is growing to develop sector-specific skills at postgraduate level, which is really important. And I'm hoping that the industry is able to allocate the resources to enable people to go on these courses and to keep them running as viable entities. Okay, if I could move on, please. Finally, our knowledge exchange activities also include research partnerships. So we've partnered with, well, I think it's 10 or 11 universities now, and 9 PhD students. I think the numbers on the slide here are a little bit out of date. Last year we had five I think, contributions to peer-reviewed publications. So, I think there's an important connection for us between our academic links in terms of the the educational and training elements, and also the research activities that we work on. So if we could step forward, please. Yeah, just to bring us together in a summary, then, I think it's pretty clear that for flooding and coastal risk management, our profession needs to be a very diverse community with a growing and increasingly wide range of skills. We've got to be able to communicate well with each other, and we're going to need to do that in a way that involves data analytics, with increasing depth and complexity, I think. And as I say, I think there's an immediate need. There's a very pressing need already, but this is also a long game, which is why for us we want to engage at through many different channels and at different levels of that skills development and process. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.